Hello everyone, here we are again, Malcolm Blunt, Bart Camp. Gonna have another chat. This time we're going back to the land of intelligence. After Dallas, it's time to go back to the spooks. Let's talk Pete Bagley. I'll start really simple. First of all, who was Pete Bagley? And let's say, how'd you find out about them and just like that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, obviously I'd seen Pete Bagley on documents that I'd looked at in the National Archives, cable traffic to do in the post-assassination period. There were lots of memos and cables flying around, and I often saw T.H. Bagley on these documents. And it was that sort of thing that passed me by to a certain extent. It wasn't until a friend of mine in Florida said, Pete Bagley's given a presentation at the Spy Museum in Washington. You should get down there. So we.
What year was this?
In Washington D.C., downtown Washington D.C., and I tried to sort of get that arranged, and I did get that arranged, and then discovered that the presentation had been cancelled. It had been withdrawn. I think because there were problems with the agency, and they didn't like Pete Bagley's book, Spy Wars. They didn't think there should be any publicity of it, and they didn't think they needed him to do a presentation at the Spy Museum. So it sort of drifted, and then fairly soon after, my friend in Florida, Ed Sherry, phoned me. I was in a hotel near the archives on Route 1.
What?
And said, if you can get down to Raleigh, North Carolina, he's doing a presentation there. Bagley's doing a presentation at the North Carolina Museum of History. So I went down there, took a train, and arrived down there and found the hotel, which was a very nice hotel, and checked in there for the Spy Museum, the Spy Conference, which was over just over about 2 days, I think. And this was in the evening before. Then there was a get together in the evening. I remember that, and then the Spy Conference started the following day, and I could see this guy with a very well coiffured white hair. That's the thing that's walking around. He was obviously one of the speakers, and when I saw him the following day at the presentation, he gave it was a bit like me and you. It was a back and forth. He didn't actually stand at a mic and give a presentation. There was an interviewer asking questions, and Pete was answering answers, doing the answers, and just prior to leaving for North Carolina, and coincidentally, I say, somebody gave me a list of questions which came from a former CIA employee, Donald Dennis, and a list of 10 questions, which I took with me, and I thought I'd have the opportunity at some stage of meeting Pete Bagley and putting these questions to him, which I did do. More or less on the last afternoon, just before we left, really. I think he was on the point of leaving, but and I got a photograph with him, which is up there, and and then asked him these questions. And he very graciously asked him the questions, and things were going swimmingly until I got question 8, which was, do you think James Angleton was the mole?
Went down well, I guess.
I don't think. I mean, he didn't make a heat about it, but I mean, obviously, like,
You could see from his reaction.
that wasn't on his radar schedule. It wasn't on his radar screen at all. You know, he was a big fan of James Angleton.
Right.
Good friend, and always said that he's been his image isn't quite the substance of the person, you know, and a lot of the dialogue about Angleton is incorrect. So that's as far as it went there, really.
Oh, so you didn't get to ask 9 and 10?
I asked 9 and 10, but I can't remember what 9 and 10 were now. I used to know the questions. But 8 I do remember. It was the Angleton question. So yeah, you know, the conference finished. I think that was the first time I met, I'm probably digressing there. There's a great guy called Brian Kelly who trained counterintelligence officers. Brilliant guy, great personality, friendly, down to earth, decent guy. And I didn't find out until later that he'd been the subject of horrendous prosecution and harassment by the FBI, who suspected him of being the mole in the FBI case where Robert Hansen was the actual mole. And he'd been suspected and had suffered horrifically. I mean, the guy had been, the FBI come in with all guns blazing, you know, at 4 o'clock in the morning, his wife there and his children. It was disgusting. You know? And it went on and on and on until they got the correct information. I think the CIA actually got the correct information and passed it on to the FBI. And then they realised that Brian Kelly was not the mole, but he'd suffered all that harassment. But it's a guy that never took, never carried it, if you know what I mean. He didn't have a grudge. It was just like something, he was unfortunate, that was it. But it took its toll on his health. He died just a few years later, and he was relatively young. Nice guy.
The stress.
You know, I like the fact that, you know, you could sit and talk to him. You know, this guy was in such a senior position inside the agency. You know, and within reason, you could ask him good questions and he'd try and answer them.
So are you done the seminar, conference? You decided to stay in contact with Bagley then?
I thought a while afterwards, yeah, I would like to
talk some more.
Yeah. And I think I asked Jeff Morley if he knew where Pete was based, and he came back and he gave me Pete's address and telephone number in Belgium, in Brussels, where he lived, and that's how it started. I mean, I wrote, then he wrote back, and then we got into some communication, and then I telephoned him, and I was commuting at that time. I was visiting a friend in Tilburg in Holland, in the South of Holland, and so I called a bus, one of your famous national coaches, to London, and then picked up a Eurolines bus and took the bus to Brussels.
I haven't done that yet.
You haven't done that one yet?
I've done the Eurostar several times, but no, not a bus.
Not the bus.
No, I'm not that desperate.
So yeah, I got into Brussels North and got a cab to his address, which is a bit away, and met him for the first time really. And I think, you know, obviously he's an old intelligence officer. He's looking at me and
Who are you?
has this guy been sent to do a number on me? Or, that sort of. So we were both a bit like going around the houses. But anyway, he was very courteous and everything. I met his wife, Maria, and she was very nice too. And she was obviously an agency. She worked for the agency as well.
Right. Can I just ask you before we go into the Brussels chapter, is the reason for contacting and wanting to stay in contact with him at first, is this because he was just an old school CIA guy you wanted to talk with, or was it like, did you have a agenda, is maybe is too strong a word, but have like a goal of something to try to achieve, to find out?
Well, I had the stuff. I copied a lot of Nosenko stuff in the 90s, the late 90s.
Right.
And that was just sitting around. I thought, well, you know, maybe I can go a bit further with this stuff, with the Nosenko material. From that Nosenko material, one of the first things I sent to him, sent it by post, was a memo from Howard Osborne, security officer, to Lawrence White, who was the executive director, complaining about Bagley. It was a 1969 letter, so Pete had been in Brussels a couple of years, I suppose, and as station chief. And it was a very nasty letter, really, because it was recommending to the executive director that he used his influence with the director to demote, you know, to make Pete suffer some sanction for his treatment of Nosenko.
Right.
The interrogation technique. And that was a bit of a shocker for Pete, I think. He had no idea that sort of stuff was going on behind the scenes. With people he knew, I mean, he certainly knew Howard Osborne, as someone, you know, socially he'd gone out with husband and wife team, you know, they got out to dinner together, you know, and then suddenly he sees his name on a piece of paper pushing for sanctions to be put on him, you know.
Twisting that knife.
Yeah, I mean, you know. So yeah, I think that intrigued him. He probably thought, well, what else has he got?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I bet. So Brussels. How many times did you meet him, and how did this go?
Many, many times. I have my diaries actually, our daily diaries. That reminds me. We've got daily diaries from way back. You know, we keep. Carol and I keep. So I could pinpoint exactly when.
Okay, so we're talking what, 2010, around that time, or earlier or later? Roughly.
2008. Probably 2008, I think.
That's when it started.
Yeah.
And it went on until 2014, roughly.
Yeah, late 2013.
Okay.
November 2013. When I think he was right, he knew he was on the last leg. You know, he'd had a terminal illness which had been diagnosed back in, even when I met him, you know, first met him. And he'd been given quite a short diagnosis. I mean, he told me it was like, the oncologist said, well, it was maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half. That was it. That was in way back then, 2008. So it was unbelievable that he kept going all these years. You know, kept going quite well, really, with his illness. But I think, in a sense, he had much to do, because I used to bury him in Nosenko material, which he then went through. And then he was also working on a second book, you know, about Sergei Kondrashev, his opposite, in the KGB. So, and he was a friend of Pete's as well, Kondrashov. So he was at Pete's apartment. I sat on the same old settee, in exactly the same position as Kondrashov used to sit, which always struck me as funny. I remember Pete showed me a photograph of Kondrashov sat on the settee. I said, that's where I sit, exactly where I sit.
That's quite telling. It's quite amazing, actually. You think of it, your counterpart, so-called enemy, right?
Mm.
And you have an amicable relation with.
Mm.
I mean, that's quite something.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah,
That's pretty rare. I mean, normally you only see that in Hollywood movies.
yeah.
You know, it's so yeah, we've known each other for 30 years and all that.
But I think they did have a really a good friendship. Pete Bagley and Sergei Kondrashov.
Now then,
They trusted each other.
of course, you had a lot of talks. You didn't tape any of them.
No.
Is there a specific reason for that, or?
Well, I'm not technology minded. It's one reason, and I just think it sometimes interferes with the flow.
Okay.
So.
So, subject-wise, obviously you spoke about Nosenko.
Yeah, mainly about Nosenko.
Okay,
because he tended to run the agenda. But I mean, we went off base a few times.
Okay, let's talk about Nosenko then, first of all. Yeah? While I take a little sleep. No.
Well, you had to copy all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have to say that there was a plastic crate this big, that high, filled with documents on just Yuri Nosenko. And that was what you described as your Nosenko files. But before that, during that period, there was plenty being scanned in, scattered over all those years. Those 3 or 4 years back then. And then last year when I got that plastic case, a certain amount was already online. I mean, but it's quite a thing, like the amount of material that's actually available.
Mm.
That's it's as stunning as when you say, like, well, if Oswald is a lone nut, there's a hell of a lot of material on just a so-called lone nut assassin. Hundreds of thousands of pages. And now I wouldn't go that far on Nosenko, but it was a considerable amount of paperwork.
Yeah, and what you got is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there was a huge amount of material on Nosenko.
Just tell for the viewers, who's Yuri Nosenko?
Yuri Nosenko was a supposed defector from the Soviet Union to America, who defected in Geneva in 1962, in the summer of '62, and but he didn't defect. It was because at that time the CIA wanted to use him as a double agent, so and play him back. So that little game went on for a while, and it wasn't really until January of '64 that he defected in total, and then he was carrying the message that he knew that Oswald was just a nut. It was not normal. He was uninteresting and all the usual garbage he comes out with.
Okay. Then you start discussing him, of course, with Mr. Bagley.
Sure.
What was his take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think they pegged him as being phony from almost from the get-go, really. People argued that it was the malevolent influence of James Angleton on Pete Bagley, that James Angleton really was so paranoid that virtually anyone coming down the pike was suspect, and therefore all those suspicions, all those prejudices were then pushed onto Pete Bagley. But I think it was It was more a case of Pete Bagley sitting down with some of the Nosenko utterances, some of the so-called intelligence and some of the stuff, and then cross-referencing it to the other defector, Anatoly Golitsyn, and realizing that it was like this overlay pattern. What you were seeing was Nosenko giving up almost the identical material in some cases. And it was just like, if you like, he was trying to minimize Golitsyn's damage by coming out with some of this stuff, this like parallelism, this sort of like joining together, making it look as though his information was bona fide, but in actual fact the true information, the real information was coming from Golitsyn. It was just an exercise in KGB damage limitation with Nosenko. That was the idea, I think. That's what they saw, and that's what Pete saw when he went through the files of both Golitsyn and Nosenko. And when he actually came to be interviewed, to be seriously put through in intelligence terms, it's called the meat grinder.
Okay.
It's called the meat grinder, where they put people through and you just ask over and over and over again. But he was more than a match, Nosenko. I always say, he almost looks to me like he's programmed. I said this to Pete many times. Was this guy hypno-programmed? Because like he could do it almost like a John Dean on many things. You remember John Dean's Watergate?
The lawyer, yeah.
The lawyer, and he does his testimony in the morning, he comes back in the afternoon, and one of the committee says to him, "Oh, could you?" I'm referring back to something, and in his mind, he was able to retrieve it, word for word. John Dean was able to word for word. So if you compare the transcript from the morning to the afternoon, that sort of now that's either something, a gift that you've got, or you're programmed. I always thought that I think I know. I've said it to Pete many times. Hypno-programmed. I'm sure he was.
What else? With regards to your talks, I mean, you've met him what, 10, 12 times?
It was more, I think. It's hundreds of hours.
Really?
By the time because they were long sessions. These were sessions that went on sometimes 10, 11 hours.
Wow.
We'd stop for lunch.
Yeah.
It's a good restaurant.
Of course.
Yeah. Good restaurant down the road, which at the tennis club.
That helps.
I used to walk to, and then right opposite was a marvellous little restaurant. Great, and very reasonable price. So we used to break for that. You break for tea, biscuits and stuff like that. But mostly it was just keeping going. But a lot of the dialogue, as you rightly say, was to do with Nosenko. He used to go off base. One of the off base things we addressed earlier a little bit was I think I was talking about Paul Dillon, who was a CIA officer, worked in Pete's shop, more internal, in his component shop. So Paul Dillon worked there briefly, and he was working with another research and analyst guy in Soviet Russia counterintelligence, and that was Lee Wigram.
Oh,
You see his name
numerous
times,
yeah.
And I asked him about, well, if I go back a bit, I took Pete one day a pencil list of everybody that worked in his little department, and which absolutely dumbfounded him, absolutely stunned him because he couldn't believe it. And at that moment in time, he called up a friend of his in America, William Hood, Bill Hood, counterintelligence officer, retired, long retired, and he was describing my visit, what they were talking about, and he said, it's just given me a list of everyone that worked in my office. He said, even down to the secretaries. Even down to the secretaries. He just couldn't believe it. So one of the names on the list was Paul Dillon, he said. And he said, oh yeah, he said, yeah, I remember Paul. He said, well, he wasn't with us long. He wasn't with us long, he said. He was in the basement.
In the basement.
That little bit of colloquial language, that internal language. And of course I looked at him like, what's he talking about? Basement? What's he talking about? And he did explain. He said he was doing an unacknowledged operation. He said, you don't ask.
Deep cover.
You don't ask. You just don't ask. Those were the exact words. You don't ask, you just don't ask. So he knew he was on it. He knew he was in the basement. I mean, he was there with Pete, working in that shop. He was doing something else.
There you have it. If Hollywood comes knocking on the door and needs another CIA term to use for one of their Central Intelligence style movies, there you go, there's your term. After sheep dipping and useful idiot, etc., etc. There you go, in the basement. Well, meat grinder is pretty cool too, actually, I have to say. You know, that will work for serious interrogation.
Yeah,
you know.
meat grinder.
They've got some quite cool names and terms for things like that. I'm just not naming them. I mean, what they could be, but not naming what they actually are. So, and changing it as such. That's quite interesting.
Well, it was interesting to me, you know, when you file away something like a comment like that in your head, and then you come across years later in Gaten Fonzie's files,
Right.
you know, a transcript of an interview. It was obviously an audio cassette interview with somebody in the transcript. I'm not sure who the interviewer was, but the subject was John Sherwood, who was a senior clandestine services officer, very senior, very high up the food chain. And John Sherwood told the interviewer that Cal Hicks, who's like an interested party to Antonio Bassiana, was in the basement. He used that term, in the basement with Alpha 66. Well, that was a big line to me, having known, having got that from Pete years earlier.
You knew right away what it meant.
Yeah. That, in other words, Hicks was working unacknowledged with Alpha 66. Well, you know. Every CIA piece of information that gets regurgitated always says we had nothing to do with Alpha 66. Nothing. And there in that one line in an interview with a former clandestine services, you get that in the basement with Alpha 66.
It's like a double up. Like you want to plausibly deny it. That someone who works for the intelligence services, in this case the Central Intelligence Agency, working with someone, and then basically put in such deep cover, and that nobody actually knows it, that only like a very select few, just like a police undercover operation as such. I don't think it's any different. Working in that capacity without anyone knowing about it, even the people from their own squad or group as such, have absolutely no knowledge about it, only like the higher ups.
Well, Paul Dillon, as we go back to Paul, that's how that in the basement term came up.
Mm.
He went on to say that tell me that Paul Dillon wasn't in his shop for long before moving to Mexico City, which is and he hook it up with another Mexico City officer called Bill Bright, William Bright.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't we have a document? Was it this one? Yeah. It was kind of interesting. You mentioned this. This is read it out for us, please. This is it's addressed to Jeremy Gunn, and this comes from Carolyn Carpenter, and it had a post-it note. And I want you to read it out. I shouldn't be doing that.
The post-it note says July in US. Pete Bagley, he and his staff found. Then underneath it's written month of May. But yeah, the interesting bit about this is
The significance.
the significance is really that Pete told me that he flew over and was interviewed by the review board, but I've never found any details about that at all. It's like it never happened. So this letter is almost a confirmation about that. You can see on the post-it note that clearly they were looking to speak to Pete Bagley. You can see that on the note.
But this isn't the only mention of the whole thing.
No. Because when I mentioned this to Pete Bagley, he said, "Oh, he went over." Yeah, he went over. He confirmed that he went over. He flew over, and he went to memory 600 something East Street, where the Assassination Records Review Board's office used to be, and that's where he had an interview there.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, this
But
document
people
is
are saying to me, Bagley was never interviewed by the review board. People are saying ARB never interviewed him, but he told me he was. So he flew over, and this letter indicates to me that it was in the works. They're clearly interested.
Is this the only piece of paper that refers to Pete Bagley going over to the States to be interviewed?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing else.
Nothing else. That's it.
Like Malcolm always says, interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Obviously Oswald was discussed, or not? His defection?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, just like his version is very almost a mirror image of Nosenko's. It's like this guy was, someone that just wasn't normal. He was just like someone that went on this trip and came back and all the rest of it, and certainly wouldn't be anybody that would be utilised by the agency. Definitely not. But those are the initial discussions.
Right.
We talked about the really early days. We talked about the assassination.
Right.
And I said my piece that it was a junk rifle, and Oswald was not a marksman, and there was a tree in the way, and all the rest of it. And and he came out with the old chestnut. He came out with that's been said to me by other people, And the old chestnut was everybody gets lucky one time. That was it.
That's not good enough.
So we crossed swords, and eventually we decided just to leave all that stuff aside. get on with it. You know, that's not for discussing. Let's discuss other things. You know.
Bigger things.
But more interesting things to him, like Lusenko.
But wasn't there a discussion where he asked you a question about whether Oswald was a witting or an unwitting defector?
That came much later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was an evolving process because, you know, he'd never really taken it on board that the mole could be somewhere within the agency. He really didn't take. When I brought up the subject that it could be within the Office of Security, he just said it unthinkable. You know, and the individual as well. You know, the possible mole might be Bruce Soley. He said, "Oh no, unthinkable, unthinkable."
Sacrilege.
Just couldn't happen. And you know, and that's when I asked him about, you know, how would he describe Bruce Soley, you know, and he said, well, you know, dour, plodding, risk averse. Definitely not risk averse. Definitely risk averse. In other words, he wouldn't, you know, he was a guy that was very meticulous in how he dealt with things. Didn't think he was. It was possible he could be a mole. I don't think it was until I took him a Slawson draft that
W. David Slawson,
the light bulb went off because it was clear that Soley was seeking to influence Slawson about the credibility of Nosenko. This in April '64, which is way too early. Can't be doing that. Here's this like slow, dour, plodding, risk-averse person pushing the credibility of Nosenko onto Slawson and onto the Warren Commission. I don't think that definitely set light bulbs off there. So, and then he got to think more and more, I think. And then eventually we got to, you know, when I was, the sort of discussions we discussed the dissemination problem, you know, where the documents came in on Oswald, and they took this turn, and they didn't go to his division. Certainly his component certainly didn't go to Soviet-Russia counterintelligence. Didn't go to anything in the Soviet-Russian division at all, and they're basically stuck in the security office and by proxy into Angleton's group, which is CIA SIG, because they were interlinked, those two components. And yeah, I think it took time, but I think he gradually got it. You know, there was something peculiar going on in regard to the security office and Mr. Soley.
Now, you said earlier you showed him some documents here and there. Did you surprise him with some documents where he just basically went, what? Like, I mean, here's the thing. I've mentioned this before, but I always thought, like, if you want to get the truth or get them to respond to something and you do an interview with that particular individual, like John Newman did with Jane Roman, and she signed off on something, and that made her look like the bad guy, basically, bad woman. It's not to trick, but it's like to uncover the truth and just basically to find out what actually happened, because hey, it's in black and white right here in front of us. What's your response?
But in his case, I think what really shocked him, you probably got some of the stuff in the collection, the coloured photocopies signed off by Pete. You know, I think there were pink ones and blue ones. Pink ones and blue ones.
Right.
Signed, you know, cable traffic. And those were the ones that really shocked him.
Well, that they're out in the open.
Yeah.
Or the content?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it was like, that's when he said, in a disgusted tone, and he just shook his head and, said, and we're supposed to be a secret organisation. It was absolutely floored, absolutely floored. But I think, that's a utilisation, for any researcher, if they can get to go to a book signing with some, if they've got some, make sure they take some, go to Mary Farrell and take some CIA documentation and put it down in front of people. I think it's a moment which can have an effect.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
I'd say so, because that's when they're like, especially intelligence people. But I know somebody who spoke to Dallas police detective, former Dallas police detective, and I was like, oh my God, if I only knew that you were doing this, I would have given you a couple of documents that would basically completely contradict for what he's been saying for years. And that's when you nail them. And it's not like to nail them, but I'm going, hold on a minute. You've been telling this fairy tale for decades, and you're this, you're that, you did that, but you didn't, because you said it yourself, A, in your statement, and B, in your Warren Commission testimony. So, unless, of course, you've been lying on the oath. So I would like you to explain that to me, please. And it's not like I want to nail them, but hey, if you've been telling me telling everyone fairy tales over the decades, then I think it's equally correct way to say, like, no, hold on a minute. And that opportunity was basically squandered, regrettably. And I was like, oh man. So, but that moment, and of course Jane Roman, of course with John Newman, and these are very rare moments, and it's only when you've done enough studies in your research and basically get these bits, and also know of the fact that what these particular people have been talking about in the decades after, and that they're, let's call them untruths, or lies, whatever you want to call them, and then basically try and set the record straight there and then. Have you got anything else? Tell me about the last few times that you met him.
Yeah, those were sad times in a way, because you could see he was starting to suffer, but still still very much pointing a way to wanting to discover more about Nasenko. I think he was extremely troubled one time when we talked, because at one of those spy conferences we talked about earlier in Raleigh, North Carolina, the HRG, you had the leaflet. Where is it?
Oh, sorry. HRG?
Yeah, that blue piece of you're going to give to Larry Schaff.
Oh, that's in my here.
Right. So these people, the historical review group of CIA, they were going around up until 2013, I think, maybe even later. And then there was a budget crisis in America, and so-called sequestration. And what happened was that some people inside the agency took the opportunity to subsume these people,
What's subsume me?
it means that they were sort of, their independence was taken. They were taken over by the larger component, which is Information Management Group, Information Management Services inside CIA. So they still exist, but they haven't got the freedom of movement. They haven't got and we lost the opportunity to engage. When they went to a museum, when they went to a university, when they went to NARA, anywhere they went, you could talk to these people about releases. You could talk to him about the Kennedy case. You know,
That was basically they were face
to face.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
face to face.
somebody to talk to
Yeah.
instead of just some dead end email address. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I happened to talk to the CIA officer, I know her name, I'm not going to repeat it, she probably still works there, that handled Nosenko's files. She was in the office when she told me that the last remaining Nosenko files were in a 4-drawer safe in her office. 4-drawer safe. Those are the last remaining ones that hadn't been released. So, and she told me that there was a push inside the agency to get resolution, you know, on the Nosenko case, involving the other side, which is Pete Bagley's side. So you get the believers and the non-believers come into a consensus. And so I said to her, would you be talking to Pete Bagley? She said, oh yes. And I was really excited because next time I went to see Pete, I said, well, good news. I said, the agency's going to be contacting you to talk about a resolution for the Nosenko case. Never heard anything. Never heard a word. Now I'm just wondering if the timing coincided with these people losing their independence. So that all that, this sort of their idea of getting resolution in the case, went down the tube when they got subsumed.
Because they got controlled.
Yeah,
they lost their control.
Yeah, that's right. The bigger part of the agency, the Information Management Group, took over.
IMG, Information Management Group?
Information Management Group, Information Management Services. Yeah. This is, of course, is the Historical Review Group. It still exists, but like there you got IMS. See? So their independence, all their good work, their outreach work, which we were doing, disappeared overnight as soon as they were absorbed, really. Great shame. It really was a great shame. When you can talk face to face to people.
Yeah, of course, it's great. You know, it's like having a relationship with an archivist at NARAS, things like that. But it's not just when it comes to records, it's in business or whatever, of course it's best. We know that Bagley was ill in the last few conversations that you had with him.
Very, very ill.
Yeah. When's the last time you saw him?
Is it November 13th?
Right.
First week, I think.
And how many months or weeks was that before
he died?
Yeah.
He died on my birthday, February the 20th.
So you saw him about 3 months prior.
2014, yeah. He actually sent an email to me. The last one was the day before my birthday, which I think he must have got. His daughter was there. It was another CIA officer I won't name, and she. I think she must have helped him do the email. And
that's quite something. A day before. I mean,
it was, yeah. It shows how important he thought it was. It was. It was a plea to continue to investigate the Nosenko business. He wrote the 40-page paper, Ghosts of the Spy Wars,
yeah.
Which he refined in those last weeks. And it was quite interesting that I don't know where it is now.
No, I think I've digitized it. Oh, the book.
Yeah, there was a book. Let me just see. Give me a hand out. Probably not going to
course not. It's lying around. You see it all the time.
Yeah, flying around. Yeah, it's
And then when you need it.
yeah, you can find it.
Ah,
Oh yeah, I found it.
oh, cool.
Right. Right. Now this is a book
Howard Bloom.
which says the mole that they never discovered was John Paisley. So, right, I want to refer you to
A note to the reader. In this book, my intention is to reveal one of the last great secrets of the Cold War. It is also the true story of one of spies' quest through the legacy of betrayals to solve this mystery. And to accomplish both these goals, I relied on not only previously classified documents, memoirs, interviews with both present and past officers in the intelligence services, but also, most helpfully, conversations with individuals who were intimately connected to the characters who animate this story. A complete chapter-by-chapter sourcing appears at the end of this book. But let me also share another advisory. When the hero of this story, Pete Bagley, knew he was dying, he wrote to a friend,
me.
in the future, an alert journalist or historian, inspired by some new revelation, may remember one or another of these old ghosts and dig deeper to lay them to rest. And that's what I set out to do in these pages that follow. That's kind of cool.
Except he's got the wrong mole.
Slight misunderstanding.
But certainly in that book, when he talks about the person he wrote to, that was me. I had his last email.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. Well, you know. On that note, I think we should call it a day.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for talking to us once again. Okay, people, thanks again, and we'll be in touch in the summer with more JFK assassination and spy stuff, shenanigans. See you later.
All the best.
Bye.